Kicking off this list is probably the deck that not many people bought for the intended purpose, and many others were confused didn't make it onto my best list for whatever reason? Gershya Rampage is a structure deck for the once competitive Gershya deck, before they faded into obscurity with the only relevant portion being Gear Gigant X for rank 4 making machines. The reason they were good in the first place was Gershya Gear allowing for an easy rank 4, and plays extending into the second reason they were good, Karakuri monsters. They spam themselves out to make synchros that spam themselves out to make synchros that draw and also manipulate the mode of cards. This deck didn't need to have Karakuris per se, but they certainly needed a bunch of the good cards Gershya loved. Or it would have mattered if they did that, if they weren't already hit on the ban list with Gershya Gear to 1, and thrust into the game's history instead of the game's meta of the time. Nah, guys, what was going to make them relevant again were those ultra-rare Gershyogers. Gershyogers. Does anyone use this card at all? But to be fair, while it does give the bare bones for making Gershyas, it doesn't do anything else. It has Gear Town, but only because it has the 2 gadget-needing Ancient Gear monsters for some reason, and then the trio themselves at a time when Ultimate Offering is banned for good reason. The deck is a mishmash of random machine pieces from Machine Revolt, and it doesn't have much to set itself apart or even have coherent synergy within itself aside from good machine cards, I guess. You might as well get the rest of the cards to scrap at that point. Coming in at number 9 is the OG Dino structure deck that made Dino Smasher's Fury much better by comparison. And also, it was just really good in the first place. It was on the first list. Well, check that out. Cards on screen. Dinosaur's Rage is just not the best, all things considered. Superconductor Tyranno has a structure deck ace card with not much behind it in the way of using it aside from using the big attack points it has, not even the burn. But you might as well just go balls to the wall with Tyranno Infinity anyway. It's terrible, but it's your only real win condition, so have fun. Other cards it boasted were big dinos that you never want to tribute to, small dinos no one wants to summon, and some of the worst traps the game has ever seen for no reason other than to make this deck funny in hindsight. I mean, it has Malfunction. When do you see that ever? Yeah, it had Heavy Storm and MST, but otherwise, not much even in the way of reprints. It's just a waste of space, to be blunt. Just a pack filler slot that pretty much defined most early structure decks. It gives you good reprints, but the rest you just sell off in lots. Including Goblet Out of the Frying Pan, because we couldn't scrape the bottom of that barrel any further, or we would hit the dirt underneath. Oh hey look, another structure deck that got a major buff as a structure deck R! Yeah, needless to say, some of those picks were definitely required. Rise of the Dragonlords was the OG Felgrand structure deck, focused on summoning dragons from the graveyard, but it doesn't do that well? Your graveyard revival is basically premature burial, but there isn't much to work with in this alone. And when the entire deck is based around it, you might want a little bit more to supplement your strategy. Morphing Jar was decent back then, and it's good as a reprint. Foolish Burial, Premature Burial, among many other cards, but the cards themselves are certainly worth more than the sum of their parts. The deck refuses to function half the time, and when we compare it even to the first structure deck, there was actual synergy with warrior cards that liked warriors, as well as warriors that were just good cards in general. This? No, you need this deck to actually have synergy for anything here to work. Nothing is good standalone. There's very little else to comment on, actually. Ever wanted to see a paradox in deck form? Then Dragunity Legion is the deck for you! Dragunity is well known for their powerful synchro monsters, including Stardust Dragon, the best Dragunity synchro monster, thanks to Phalanx, Dux, and Vajrayana, as well as their powerhouse field spell and Dragon Ravine. But this deck is flawed because of one tiny detail. There are no synchros. The mascot, Leviathan, is a big level 8 main deck no one uses unless you just want a meme, and aside from that, what else does this give you? Equip spells? It doesn't even give you a Phalanx! You need to go for that yourself, which is incredibly bad deck design. And before we get all up in arms, yes, I said that having an extra deck was a luxury in most structure decks, and a pipe dream when this thing came out. But you can't have a structure deck based entirely around a deck that is based entirely around the extra deck, and not have an extra deck! It would have been a perfect time to reprint Gaiderg and Vajrayana as well, as these things cost a pretty penny back in the day. This deck needs synchros to work, because otherwise the win condition is Aklis, making a Dragunity attack twice, and that's basically it! It's Diet Dragunities, but instead of removing the sugar, they removed any and all power output. Now we take a look at the oldest Spellcaster structure deck around, which was for Dark Magician, but really old. No, not Dark Sage. The one you probably forgot about, Dark Eradicator Warlock. Spellcaster's Judgment is a basic spellcaster structure deck with the typical trappings and an ace monster that shines up as a level up award for Arcana in Duel Links, and that's the most important thing it will ever be. I actually liked playing this card in my middle school good cards deck. And granted, it was like the worst card in that deck, but it was fun. Of course, you got the ye old spellcaster cards like Magician of Faith, Royal Magical Library, and various spells, but it's just boring. It's not nearly as much fun as either Endymion structure deck. If you want to use spell counters, just go full ham and have fun. It's just a boring version that makes me want to play Magic the Gathering instead. Coming from the harsh past of 2012 is the incredibly underwhelming Samurai Warlords. Advertised as a budget option for getting 6 Sams, an already budget deck for the time anyway, it came with cards of little value. It had the entire original 6 Sams, along with shit like Immortal Bushi and Shien's Daredevil, because Konami remembers them, so you have to as well. The only particularly noteworthy cards in it are Kizan, Darkhole, Rhoda, Gateway, and Fiendish Chain, all of which were budget cards you could get for under $1 and just about anywhere. That's right, it doesn't have Shien, or Shien, with a space. Instead, we have the amazingly underwhelming Shadow of the Six Samurai, Shien. This one doesn't have a space, so it's less cool. And it's just a beat stick, I guess, that turns your 6 Sams into 2k beat sticks and makes Kageki into a 3500 attack monster for a turn. Woohoo! Really worth it. Exactly what 6 Sams wanted to run. Kageki. The deck had a good chance to make this deck actually have support, add in new cards, make it fun, more Bushido counter support, whatever. It didn't do that, and it came out at the weirdest time it possibly could, before Gateway got unbanned and after 6 Sams were actually meta and tearing up the entire game. So it's a weird middle child when talking about the history of 6 Sams. One best left forgotten, honestly. Do you love duel monsters? Do you love underwhelming archetypes based on a series of vanillas? Well, the 2016 structure deck for Yugi is the opposite of the Kaiba one, because while that one introduced ABCs, an archetype that would be meta or at least rogue for years on end, Yugi had Magnet Warriors. A rather underwhelming pile of rocks. Talk shit about ABC all you want, at least that was relevant and genuinely fun to play. Berserkion's 3 pops are good, but it cannot compete with ABC Dragon Buster's accessibility, quick effect banishing, the ability to tag out for its materials to get the hell out of dodge. It doesn't compare to any of it. It doesn't help that it's missing Delta, their main playmaker, because it was a V-Jump promo for some ungodly reason. And the non-magnet cards are garbage that's been reprinted to death. You want some Yugi cards? Buy Duelist Pack Yugi. Buy any other product that has Yugi's face on it. You can still find the reloaded decks at Target. What are you doing buying this? Because even then you're not getting the fun Yugi cards, you're just getting rocks. Zombies seem to be one of the most popular subjects for structure decks. The first, Zombie Madness, gets some slack for being one of the first structure decks in the TCG, and for having great staples. And the newest one, Zombie Horde, has some great reprints and some powerful new cards just to spice up the playstyle. However, the second one, Zombie World, fails to impress. Its main card, Zombie World, can be detrimental to certain decks, and has shown its power in the Synchro era through Crimson Blader and Revived King Hades, but the rest of the deck is not great, particularly the monster lineup. They all either need Zombie World in order to work, or are just underwhelming, like Royal Keeper or Ryukoki. The only particularly non-Zombie World cards worth noting here are Card Destruction and Card of Safe Return, which are great, but can't save this deck from being absolutely terrible garbage to actually play with. Especially considering there are so many other better and more fun options, including, oh, I don't know, the one that came out in, 1996? Just take that one. Coming in at number 2 is one of the first Wind structure decks that gave birth to a monster that was... Lord of the Storm was the structure deck for Simorgh, a bird who recently got its own archetype. But even that does not save the OG Simorgh's lackluster appeal. His effect fails to synergize with the actual structure deck, as most cards here tend to bounce back row, not destroy them, so you can just keep setting your cards to avoid Simorgh's scary 1000 burn. Otherwise, there isn't much to talk about. It has MST, Card Destruction, Heavy Storm, a whopping 1 Reckless Greed for some ungodly reason, an Icarus attack, but none of it's worth it. This deck legit runs Lady Ninja Yay! And a single ninjutsu Art of Transformation, which you can't even use for Simorgh because the original one cannot be special summoned. So it's like they put in Wind Effigy or something like that. Nothing about this deck functions or works the way you want it to, and that's still not enough to put it in number 1, crazily enough. Alright guys, you knew it was going to be number 1. It's probably in the thumbnail anyway. Invincible Fortress was the Exod structure deck, aka, oh god, why the structure deck. This deck focused on the rock type's only real gimmick before Gorgonix came around and turned it into level 3 turbo, and that gimmick is dealing deflect damage through strong defense position monsters and not even being able to function properly as we're so far from being able to make defense OTK, or defense TTK, or a defense 4-turn kill, or defense killing your opponent at all. It doesn't help that Canyon, their field spell, is about as blatant of a trap as passing turn and waiting to be evenly matched. There are some good cards like MST and Premature Burial, but it's overall just really underwhelming. Exod alone is just a bad boss monster, as he needs Sword and Shield to actually do anything you want him to do. All the Sphinxes are terrible, from Harako to Guardian just being the best in a pile of garbage. And it also only has 1 Reckless Greed, because decks did that back in the day. DZF was right. Worst structure deck by a mile and a half.